He was supposed to be gone for 2 weeks. But when millionaire Edward Langston returned home unexpectedly, he didn't expect to hear laughter. His son hadn't laughed like that in years. Then he saw her, the maid, down on one knee, not just tying his son's shoes, but whispering words that left his son beaming, and Edward completely paralyzed. Because no one, not his ex-wife, not the best doctors, had ever made his son smile like that. And what she said when she looked up, changed everything he thought he knew about love, healing, and the people he overlooked. The Langston estate sat at the edge of a pine-draped hill in Westchester County, New York. A sleek, cold masterpiece of glass and steel, it was a house designed by an architect who had no children and probably never hugged his mother. Everything inside had sharp edges, clean lines, custom lighting, marble that echoed when you walked. And inside that sterile perfection was 7-year-old Liam. Liam Langston hadn't spoken a word in 13 months. Not since his mother left. The boy was diagnosed with developmental delays at birth, later identified as a mix of autism spectrum disorder and Down syndrome. He had a soft mop of blonde hair and wide, ocean blue eyes that seemed to hold every question in the universe. When his mother walked out after a bitter custody battle and a courtroom drama that lit up Manhattan tabloids, Liam shut down. No more talking. No more playing. Just silence. Edward Langston tried. Lord knows he tried. But he was a man who built empires, not relationships. The 39-year-old tech investor was on the cover of Forbes twice before 35. He spoke to rooms of 500 people, but couldn't find the words to reach the boy sitting 3 feet from him at breakfast. So, Edward did what wealthy men do when they can't fix something. He hired help. 3 nannies came and went. 2 speech therapists. A behaviorist from Yale. All left politely, with the same quiet defeat in their eyes. Then came her. Her name was Rosa. Mid-30s. Immigrant. 2 kids of her own, one with special needs. No fancy degrees. No expensive training. Just a soft voice, steady hands, and the kind of warmth that people only develop when they've lived through storms of their own. Edward hadn't met her. He was busy closing a deal in Dubai. His assistant hired her after a rushed Zoom interview and a glowing recommendation from one of the security staff. She moved into the guest house the next day. And the mansion remained quiet. Until today. Edward's plane landed early. He didn't text ahead. He just wanted one night in his own bed without press, handshakes, or expectations. It was nearly 10 p.m. when his sleek black Range Rover rolled silently through the private gates. Inside the house, only one light was on. The kitchen. He paused. Then he heard it. Laughter. Not loud. Not manic. Just a soft, high-pitched giggle echoing down the hallway. The kind of laughter that punched him straight in the chest. His fingers froze on the door handle. Was that Liam? He stepped inside slowly. The marble floor was cool under his shoes. He moved down the hallway like a man entering a memory. And then he saw them. His son. Sitting on the floor in SpongeBob pajamas, barefoot, holding a stuffed giraffe. And the maid. Kneeling in front of him. Tying his shoelaces. But not just tying them, she was whispering something into his ear, her voice barely audible. And Liam was smiling. Smiling. Edward couldn't breathe. He watched as Rosa finished tying the second lace, tapped his son's nose gently, and whispered, "Mi valiente chico, you did it. You tied the first one yourself." Liam giggled again. It was real. It was his son. Rosa turned her head slightly and saw Edward standing there. She froze. But didn't look scared. Instead, she reached out and placed her hand gently on Liam's shoulder. "Liam," she said softly, "your daddy's home." The boy turned. And for the first time in over a year, he opened his mouth. A small, shaky voice emerged. "Hi, Daddy." Edward dropped his suitcase. And his heart shattered in the best possible way. Edward couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. He'd sat through billion-dollar acquisition deals, faced down aggressive media, even watched his ex-wife drag his name through national TV. But none of that prepared him for the sound of his son's voice breaking a year of silence. Just 2 words. "Hi, Daddy." Edward felt his throat close. His hands trembled. His eyes burned. Liam just smiled like nothing unusual had happened. As if he'd always been able to speak and had simply chosen not to. He picked up his little giraffe and crawled into Rosa's lap, curling in without hesitation. She didn't flinch or tense up. She wrapped her arms around him, natural as breathing. Edward finally stepped forward. How long has he been talking?" Rosa looked up slowly. Tonight was the first time. His jaw clenched. Not in anger, he didn't even know what he was feeling. His mind was sprinting to catch up. But, I've had therapists here. Specialists. His voice cracked. I spent hundreds of thousands trying to get him to say anything. Rosa didn't flinch. They talked at him, sir. I just listened. He sank into one of the bar stools, elbows on the counter, staring at his son. Liam was now humming quietly, still in her arms, gently stroking her wrist as if it gave him comfort. Edward dropped his head into his hands. I didn't think he'd ever speak again. She didn't respond right away. Instead, she pressed her cheek to Liam's head and whispered something in Spanish. Whatever it was made the boy smile, his eyes closing with peace. I know what it's like, she said quietly, finally looking at Edward. To be surrounded by voices, but still feel alone. He looked up. Your son wasn't broken, she continued. He was just waiting for someone who wouldn't rush him. Edward swallowed hard. And that someone was you. I didn't mean for it to be, she replied. I'm not a doctor, Mr. Langston. I'm not trained. I was just trying to be kind. He blinked. Kind. The word felt foreign in that cold marble kitchen. The silence stretched. Then Rosa gently shifted Liam to a blanket and stood. Would you like me to explain what we've been working on? Edward nodded slowly. Please. She motioned for him to follow. They walked into the sunroom, where floor-to-ceiling windows framed the darkness outside. A stack of children's books lay on the coffee table. Crayon drawings were taped to the glass. One showed a stick-figure man holding a boy's hand, labeled Me and Daddy. His chest tightened again. I started reading to him, Rosa said, flipping through a well-worn book. Every night. Same time. No questions. No pressure. Just rhythm and tone. After a few nights, he started humming along with the rhymes. Then pointing at pictures. Then, she paused, smiling slightly, he whispered a word. Quiet. But it was there. Why didn't anyone tell me? She hesitated. You've been gone, sir. And I didn't want to promise anything before it was real. Edward sat back on the couch, staring at the wall of drawings. There was one of a woman with a ponytail, holding a giraffe beside Liam. In a child's scrawl, it said Rosa. You mean something to him, he said quietly. She didn't respond. Her eyes were soft, but cautious. He turned to face her fully. What else has he said? She looked down, brushing her hand across the spine of the book. Tonight, before you walked in, I told him that sometimes the people who leave, didn't leave him. They left their own pain. And that it's not his fault. Edward flinched like he'd been struck. You weren't supposed to hear that, Rosa said softly, looking up. No, he said, swallowing hard. I think I was. They sat in silence for a while, just the soft hum of the air vents and the occasional creak of the old pine beams overhead. Finally, Edward spoke again. You have 2 children? She nodded. Where are they? In the Bronx. With my sister, for now. I come home weekends. He looked at her carefully. Why'd you take this job? This far away, this isolated? She exhaled, her expression suddenly tired. Because no one else wanted me. My youngest has seizures. Most families see that as a problem. Your assistant didn't ask. Edward felt something shift in his chest. This woman, this quiet, gentle soul, had done more for his son in 6 weeks than he had in 2 years. Do you want to stay here full-time? He asked suddenly. She blinked. Sir? Not as the maid. Not as a temp. I want you to stay. Bring your kids. Live here. I'll arrange everything, healthcare, school enrollment, a raise. She shook her head. You don't owe me that. I do, Edward said, his voice hard. You gave me my son back. She studied him. And what happens when you go back to work, sir? When this house fills with meetings again? Will you still see him the way you do tonight? Edward didn't answer. But he knew she was right. And in that moment, he realized the real challenge wasn't getting Liam to speak. It was learning how to finally listen. The next morning, sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows like liquid gold. For once, it didn't feel sterile or cold. The Langston house, usually silent, spotless, almost museum-like, felt lived in. Warm. Human. Edward stood in the doorway of the kitchen, coffee untouched in his hand. He wasn't watching the stock market. He wasn't scrolling emails. He was watching his son. Liam sat at the breakfast table, his giraffe tucked under one arm, carefully placing blueberries on his waffles. He wasn't speaking much, but he was humming. A low, content tune. And when Rosa handed him a napkin, he smiled and said, "Thank you." 2 words. Simple. And Edward's heart clenched all over again. Morning, Rosa said quietly, appearing beside him. She wore a loose gray sweater over jeans, hair pulled back, eyes soft but alert. A little tired. A little guarded. But not afraid. Good morning, Edward replied. You sleep okay? She nodded. Didn't expect to stay in the guesthouse again, but, yes. I meant what I said last night, he added, his tone serious. I want you here. I want your kids here, full time. I know, she said. And I believe you mean it. He turned toward her, sensing hesitation. But, she inhaled. But money doesn't fix what's broken. Edward frowned. I'm not trying to throw money at this. I'm trying to show I'm serious. I believe you, she said gently. But your son doesn't need a bigger staff. He needs you. Those words hit harder than she knew. Edward looked down at his coffee. I don't know how to be what he needs. No one does at first, Rosa replied. But he's not asking for perfection. Just presence. Edward let that settle. Then he did something he hadn't done in a long, long time. He set the coffee down and walked, without phone, without agenda, toward his son. Liam looked up, eyes wide. Edward knelt beside him. Hey, buddy, he said, voice softer than usual. Can I sit with you? Liam nodded once. Edward slid into the seat next to him. For a few seconds, they just sat there, the sound of a fork against a plate filling the quiet. Then Edward took a blueberry off Liam's plate and popped it in his mouth. Liam gasped dramatically. Hey! Edward's eyebrows shot up. You can talk. Liam giggled. And just like that, something inside Edward cracked open. He smiled wide, really smiled, for the first time in months. Later that day, Edward asked Rosa to walk with him around the estate grounds. They moved past the koi pond, the tennis court no one used, the ivy-covered wall that Liam once painted on with chalk before the cleaning crew scrubbed it spotless. Do you know the worst part? Edward said quietly, staring out across the empty lawn. Rosa looked over. I built this life, this house, this company, for a family. But I didn't know how to have one. She didn't interrupt. My ex-wife told me once that I outsourced love. I thought she was being cruel. He sighed. Now I think she was right. She was hurt, Rosa said, choosing her words carefully. But maybe she also saw something you weren't ready to admit. Edward glanced at her. I used to think parenting was about providing. Roof, food, safety. It is, she said. But also presence. Softness. Attention. Kids like Liam, they notice everything. Even silence. They paused under a maple tree. Its leaves were just beginning to shift, catching the earliest notes of fall. He's different with you, Edward said. He trusts you. I can see it. I think he wants to trust you too, she replied. But trust takes time. And choice. He swallowed. So how do I start? She smiled. You already did. Last night. He was quiet for a moment. Then, will your kids be okay moving here? I meant what I said, I'll handle everything. They'll be fine, she said. They're used to adjusting. And honestly, they'll love it here. She paused, looking at him. I want to be clear. I'm not looking for charity. Edward shook his head. And I'm not offering it. He meant it. Every word. Because this wasn't about guilt anymore. Or even gratitude. It was about rebuilding something that never should have fallen apart to begin with. And Rosa, quiet, strong, unnoticed Rosa, was the one who'd taught him how. That night, Edward read to Liam for the first time. He fumbled every page. Got the voices wrong. Dropped the book once. But Liam didn't care. He curled up beside his father and rested his head against his chest. At one point, he reached up and touched Edward's chin, then whispered something that shattered the last wall inside him. Mom never read like this. Edward didn't know whether to smile or cry. So he did both. He looked down at his son and whispered back, neither did I. Until now. And just outside the cracked door, Rosa stood watching. A hand over her mouth, eyes full of tears. Because in that moment, without fanfare, without miracles, something truly rare had taken root. Not just healing,